Hello, everybody. This is Joshua Hatton with One Nation Under Whiskey Podcast. I'm joined today, and I'm joined as always by my good friend, my business partner, the dear, the lovely, the oh-so-gray, Jason Johnston Yellen. How are you, Jason? What's happening? What's going on in Jason's life?
That's a good question. Well, we're getting ready for back to school.
Yeah.
Goodness knows what that's going to look like.
It's going to look like
tomorrow. Tomorrow, going back to university after multiple spine surgeries and COVID time at home. It's crazy. But you've actually segged beautifully into what I was curious about with you.
Oh, okay.
Which is from a whiskey perspective.
Mm-hmm.
You, over the last few weeks, have been dipping your toe back into what we call market visits.
Yes, I have.
And I've been curious what that has looked like for you, because you, like everybody, came off the road for the better part of 15 months, 16 months. I'm not exactly sure the number,
months,
but
yeah.
right, long ass time, as they say in the medical journals.
Yep.
And so now that you're back out there, have things changed? Are shelves looking different? Are there new expectations on the ground?
That's a really good question, because because it's a good question because the answer changes depending on what aspect you're talking about.
And I thought it might.
Right? So one thing that's changed is your ability to see anybody. You can see people, but not everybody is ready to be seeing people. Are you talking store owner, spirits buyer, distributor, sales reps? Good question. Second good question. I should have been more
Thank
clear.
you.
I'm talking about spirits buyers at shops. The people responsible for stocking the back bar and figuring out their cocktail programs and things like that. Right. So the trips that I've taken, we've been able to set up appointments. Everybody's been wanting to see us. We've had normal, unmasked meetings, so long as we understand that both parties, us and them, are vaccinated. However, I've heard in other places, like in Chicago, there's still major players who aren't really seeing anybody. There's a shop that I think I've taken you to before, Independent Spirits. The owner there, he's not tasting with you. You drop off the samples and then he'll taste. And I would not be surprised if I'll find more of that, right? So there is that. So you've got a bit of a mix there. The shelves are stocked pretty well, I would say. Though if you look closely, there's the double-facing slots. So for those that don't know this term, right, when you peruse your liquor shelves at your local retail shop, and you look, and there's a bottle of Glenmorangie, and then a bottle of Glenmurray, and then a bottle of this Glen and that Glen. But if you really pay attention, you may see it's actually two Glenmorangie 10-year-olds side by side taking up two spots, and then the Glenmurray whatever bottling taking up two spots, and so on. So the shelves will look packed, but it's not as packed as you think they are. And that does change from shop to shop, but I'm seeing that a bit more than I had pre-COVID.
We talked about it a lot on the podcast, both this one and Extra, but we weren't really out there speaking to store owners, spirits buyers, what have you. Are there any residual effects from the tariffs that you're seeing or hearing? Are you noticing some pricing difference on shelves? Are you being asked about any pricing differences?
We've not been asked about any pricing differences. We have had conversations about the tariff, right? When you're talking with someone, they say, "Oh, thank God the tariffs are away. Hopefully we'll see some prices come down. Things like that." It gives us the opportunity to tell them what Kilchoman and Impex did, and Port Ascaig also lowered some of their pricing to ensure pricing isn't goosed by the tariffs. But generally speaking, that isn't a conversation anymore. People have sort of moved on.
And I wondered about that, right? When we had multiple crises happening at the same time, but the day the magic wand gets waved and tariffs go away, you stop worrying about it. As you and I have discussed previously, does there continue to be fallout from it? Absolutely. Mm-hmm. But if you're just on the front lines of the everyday spirits buying, you're on to the next thing, right? You are now dealing with potential new lockdowns. And if you're in other countries, you very well could be back locked down again. We keep seeing South Africa on again, off again, when it comes to liquor stores being opened and closed, and bars being open and closed. So, we just spoke with our friends at Backwoods, Lee and Bree, and now what things are looking like in Melbourne and Sydney, and just when they thought they were out the woods, they're back in it again. So all of that is just to say, the tariffs, they're not on paper anymore. They really have, quote unquote, gone away.
Yes.
But pricing from product that came in during the tariffs is still inflated.
Oh, it is, right? Because the importers purchased the liquid, brought in the liquid at a certain price with that 25% tariff applied, right? The distributors purchased from the importer with that 25% tariff applied, and all down the chain. And so prices on store shelves, if that product was affected by the tariffs, those prices are going to reflect that, because it's only just happened. Right?
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. So I was just kind of curious how those conversations were going. Obviously, today's chat with Scott Harris, and we will speak with Becky Harris, Catoctin Creek Distilling Company. But part of that is that revisiting what did things look like for you. For me, it's not even saying what did it look like for you during COVID or coronavirus or the pandemic. For me, it's now, what did things look like for you during the 2020 portion of the pandemic and the early 2021 portion? As we're now, staring Delta and Lambda and Delta Plus and goodness knows what else is coming.
And what's so interesting about your conversation with Scott, the way it starts, and our listeners, of course, will hear this, is there's a hint of hope in his words and in the tone of his voice, because restrictions were coming down, and things were opening up, and so you can, that's a really good marker to let people know when you recorded that conversation. And just in our conversation now, when you had asked what's it like visiting shops and bars, all of the information I gave you happened before Delta became a thing where states are putting certain measures into place, where New York City has instituted don't come into the restaurant if you're not vaccinated. Don't come to my gym if you're not vaccinated, right? The last time I was on the street was before that, right? So you could ask me 2 weeks from now, and I think I'll have a different answer. And then you'll ask me 2 weeks after that, and my answer will change a little bit again.
Well, right, and it's right back to the answer I started to give you when you'd say, how are things in the world of Jason? Well, they're very uncertain, right? Yeah. We thought early July things were taking a particular form, early June they were taking a particular form. Here we are in early August and they're taking a different form. it continues to be a period in flux, which, gosh, I don't think I could have polished that turd any better than that statement. A period in flux. I should get a government job with bullshit like that coming out my mouth.
That's really good. That's some excellent jargonese. Well done.
It is. It is. I always think of, George Carlin.
Yeah.
George Carlin had a piece. I don't think he's had multiple pieces, but he had a piece that was, as you add more words to describe a condition or a situation, you say less, and you lessen the impact of it. And the example that I always remember him giving is shell shock, right? Shell shock is serious. That gets your attention.
Yep.
And when you go through various iterations, but ultimately you get to post-traumatic stress disorder, right? It remains very serious and very significant.
Yeah.
But now it's PTSD.
Yeah.
You can throw an acronym at it and you've said even a lot less.
Yeah, and you're like us, just that thing. It's PTSD. But no.
It's just PTSD.
This person's been shell-shocked. Oh, well, hold on a second. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so I feel like that's, partly as human beings, it's how we survive, right? It's how we get through a lot of this stuff. But the uncertainty is such, and I really was just curious for you, being back out, seeing folk, for me going back out, obviously earlier in the summer I had my conversation with Bill Thomas. You and I had our conversation in person with Bruce Russell.
Yeah.
Here's my visit with Scott and Becky. We do have another in person coming up in a couple of episodes. But right now I'm kind of looking around wondering, will I continue with the in-person stuff? What's that going to look like?
Yeah, I couldn't blame you if you wanted to hold back a little bit until cases go back down. And, you know, everybody's got to feel their own level of safety, right? And to fault you for saying, you know what, I'm going to hold off on the in-person thing until I feel a bit more comfortable, fine. If you said, I'm okay with this, I got the mask, I'm vaccinated, I've got my hand lotion, good to go, fine. Couldn't fault you either way.
Yeah. Anyway, before the goal wasn't to go down this path. It was mostly just to set up that we continue to live in a period of flux, and we're still adjusting. Here's a quick question for you.
Okay, go ahead.
You can ask me a question.
Well,
you can ask me a question.
I was gonna continue on the spirit of the conversation of this of being in flux, and discuss a whiskey that I've been reaching for as of late, but I can hold off.
So I was just about to ask you, unprompted, unscripted, we have no production meeting notes. I was going to ask you, what's the best thing you've drunk in the last 2 weeks?
Holy crap. Holy crap.
And if you wanted to turn 2 weeks into 4 weeks, that would be perfectly fine as well. But I'm just curious what recently has got your attention. And we'll just do this quick and then we'll jump into the Scott interview. This isn't going to take over the podcast. I'm just curious.
Yeah. It's been two things. One, I don't think will surprise you, and the other one may or may not surprise you, but I think the combination of the two will surprise you. So the best thing that I've drunk in the past 2 weeks may be the best thing that I've drunk this year. It's definitely neck and neck with another. This is the 13-year-old Kilchoman Single Cask for the Whiskey Exchange that you got me.
You're welcome.
I'm just absolutely floored by it. I'm just, Kilchoman has a very specific flavor profile that lives in this world of citrus and floral, a bit of white chocolate going on, things like that. And occasionally, very occasionally, I get a bit of fruit going on. And if there is fruit, it's going to be some orchard fruit, maybe pears, maybe some apples. This is a tropical fruit bomb to the levels of of late teens Bowmores. Like it's just juicy and guava and papaya and starfruit and oh my gosh, there's it's not a fruit but roasted fennel going on there, which gives you this kind of anisey kind of thing coming through, or licoricey kind of thing going through, and then this lavender backbone. The lavender is like intertwined with the peat, and it is just, I think it's the best Kilchoman I've ever had, and it is potentially the best whiskey I've had this year, potentially.
Yeah. No, I've raved to Jess about it. Sweet Scott, Elijah, you. I've been thoroughly enjoying it. It's a little cracker. It is, and we've got 3 days to buy more of it before this podcast goes out.
But it's one of these things where I'm with the importer of Kilchoman. I've tasted tons of ex-bourbon barrels. I know what to expect. Excellent bourbon cask whiskey that's always going to deliver, and it's going to fit within a range of flavors. And this one, it just seems as if Kilchoman broke the glass ceiling and reached a new level of flavors. It took me beyond what I know as Kilchoman, but remained Kilchoman. That was remarkable. That was absolutely remarkable.
Yeah, it definitely remains Kilchoman, and yet older Kilchoman that. Yeah, it's doing something rather special. Yeah, yep, that's a good call. I like that.
Yep. And what about you?
So as soon as I asked you the question, I started looking around my desk and the floor around my desk to get my own answer. And what's really become obvious for me is I haven't really been tasting new general release bottles in the last 2 weeks or 4 weeks. What I've been doing is tasting a ton of samples for the company. And one of the things I've, again, been telling you about and Jess about and Elijah about is I feel like I've just rediscovered Dal Ewan. And I have been raving about Dal Ewan. Such very special examples and different ages. But then it got me thinking, a bottle that you and I have talked about plenty on previous podcasts, we did an undisclosed 28-year-old Speyside that was, $200 a bottle, and was a great, it wasn't quite a slow burner, but it was just a burner, right? Because it was in that kind of 200s, and it didn't have a distillery name on it. But that may very well have come from a distillery that I've just been rediscovering at younger ages.
Yeah, and do you know?
And I don't have any of it.
I don't have any of it either. And I will tell you, I think that is the best cask of whiskey we've ever bottled.
I remember you saying that. Yep.
I
remember you saying that. And neither of us have any of it.
Nope.
And now I'm rediscovering the distillery at younger ages. Yeah, I don't. So that's the one. As I kind of look over my desk, I've gone through a ton of great samples, and we'll be saying more about what they turn into as the months go along. Yeah. But I will say we've got Dal Ewan coming out in ROW, rest of the world, UK and rest of the world, release number 3. We've got Dal Ewan coming out to the US retail as well. And we've got a little bit more Dal Ewan up our sleeves as well. It's I'm so happy and I'm so impressed with it as I keep revisiting it. So there's my answer.
Can I tell you what my other whiskey was that I've been revisiting?
Okay.
Because I did mention that. Did I just think that, or did I mention that there'd be two and you'd be surprised of the combination of the two? Did I say that
Yes,
aloud?
you did. You did. You did set this up. You did indeed. Yes.
Man. So in the summertime, I like to drink two things. Bourbon cask, matured Islay whiskey, and Glenmorangie. I think it's just a lovely, stone fruity, summery whiskey. and I had purchased a bottle of cake, Glenmorangie cake, just a bit before we had our conversation with Bill Lumsden. And I remember opening it, pouring it, and not loving it at all. And then when we had our conversation with him, and he said, "You had cake, right?" And and you had said yes. I remember you'd said that you had it before. I had said yes, and I was fearful that he was going to say, "And what did you think?" Because I would have to just be honest. And I'm glad he didn't ask, because I would have been honest. But revisiting it after it's oxidized a bit, oh my gosh. My biggest complaint was that the texture wasn't there. And because the texture wasn't there, I wasn't able to get that connection between the palate and the finish. And returning to it, it's telling a lovely story. It's a great little drinker, and those Tokai casks really shine there. Again, allowing Glenmorangie to remain Glenmorangie, but just taking that spirit in a new direction. And so I think I like both whiskeys for very different reasons. Or I should say, I should say I like both whiskeys for the same reason, that they get into new flavor zones while remaining true to their spirit, but they're two very different whiskeys. That's what I meant to say.
I think that fits with how we explore casks in this company.
Yeah.
Right? I think that hits our remit on the head. How far into the bottle were you for this oxidation to happen? Were you just through the neck or through the shoulders?
I was 2 drams in, and I usually pour about 3/4 of an ounce. So not a lot. So
you're saying once you get rid of the neck pour, it really improved?
So tell us about the opening here with your conversation with Scott Harris at Catoctin Creek Distilling Company.
It was just an honor to sit down with them and catch up. He's both a friend of the podcast. He's also a friend. And just getting to sit down with a friend in the office at Catoctin Creek, we got to talk about, the COVID situation. We got to talk about Gwar, their collaboration with Gwar. We got to talk about the expansion plans that they've got, the things they're working on around that distillery, and the good people that they've got working in their bricks and mortar. And then we got to go out to the warehouse as well, and that will be a little separate part of today's episode. So right now we're just going to jump into the chat that just Scott and I had in the back of Catoctin Creek, back in his office. Mm-hmm. And then we'll come back, and you and I are actually going to pour something.
Looking forward to that.
Good to see you, my friend.
Yes, good to see you again.
Last time we spoke, we were in COVID. You were battling for survival. Mm-hmm. You were getting direct shipping to consumers. You had hoped that would hang around afterwards.
Correct.
We're sitting here July of 2021. America is slowly coming out of it. Parts of Virginia may be coming out faster than other parts of Virginia.
I will say, in Virginia's defense, we have 70% vaccine adoption rate too.
Which
so
is
that's
good to hear.
That's a good milestone.
Good to hear. So how's it looking as you're hopefully coming out of this?
I think it's looking bright, so we're glad for that. With regard to the direct-to-consumer shipping, as of right now, we still have that privilege. The state has extended it beyond. So the governor's original emergency orders now have expired. So they have declared the emergency officially over in Virginia as far as all the measures and things that were in place, mask mandates and all of that kind of stuff. But the ability to ship direct to consumer has remained. So the state has, I think, as we thought, decided that that's a really nice way to do it, and we can do that safely without imperiling, underage drinkers and things like that. So for now, we have that ability. It's not codified into legal status. It's sort of a privilege that's granted by the ABC authority, but we still can do it. So that's a good thing.
Are consumers still looking for you online? Is that demand still there?
Well, what's interesting is it changed the business model a bit. So it has become the main mechanism that we use to do new releases. So we no longer allow people or even encourage people to line up outside the door, with the line down the street. We now just throw it all into the online store, and then they can, pick it up at their leisure, or they can have it directly shipped to their home. So that's really changed for us. How we release special releases and things like that.
How about your local crew? We know with the Nation, we're obviously national, and we have our lottery-only releases, despite being online. How are your local supporters who could come down the distillery feeling about all of Virginia being involved in your releases now?
That's a fair point. There's more competition now, from the state, but our local people are the most enthusiastic supporters, and so they're going to get on at 8 o'clock sharp on a Monday morning and pick up those releases. So hopefully, it hasn't detrimented them too much, and of course for them, then they can just mark a pickup for the product and just come get it at their leisure. I would much rather do that than wait 2 hours in a line, before some.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
Yeah, we joke within the Nation, Jason's not standing in queues for whiskey. That's just not happening. No. Speaking of special releases and a project that you somehow pulled off during COVID times, you did this collaboration with Gwar, the band Gwar.
Yeah.
How did that come about, and how did you pull that off during COVID?
They were bored, we were bored. So so Gwar is a band based in Richmond, Virginia, right? So I
didn't know they were that
local.
local.
They come out of Richmond, and they approached us. They'd been fans. They have the Gwar Bar in Richmond, so it's a Gwar themed bar that they own and run.
Right.
And they had approached us about doing a collaborative whiskey. They wanted, they've got branded skateboards and even a line of cannabis products. Like they've got all these different things that they sort of put their name on, and they're kind of good at that. And they have a very big following, international following, in fact. And so, we were actually like, well, do we really want to do this? And then we, looked at the band and realized what they really were and thought this is going to be a lot of fun, and so it was really kind of a neat opportunity to work with them. It's been fun. The band is great. They're super neat guys to get to know them. And you realize the whole thing is just a lot of fun, like we had a couple of our investors were a little bit, I don't know if this really fits the image with what we're trying to do and all that kind of stuff. And it's like anybody who understands Gwar knows that it's all a big joke, right? It's just not to be taken seriously, So in that vein, writing the press releases was great fun, talking about hurling the barrels around the asteroids and then, orbiting the moon and all this kind of stuff, and made from the blood of the gods and things like that. It's just fantastic.
Everything I read coming out of Catoctin Creek just looked like you were all having a ton of fun with it.
Oh my God, so much fun.
A ton of fun.
Best press releases ever, because usually a press release is so buttoned up, We are excited to announce that we have this and this, and it's really new opportunities that we've opened up this new thing and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, yawn. So yeah, to be able to use the words, blood of the gods in a release was just fantastic.
It definitely speaks to Joshua's sensibilities.
Oh yeah, Joshua, I'm sure.
That's
he probably was a fan
sense.
of the band, I would think.
I would imagine so. Certainly
seems like his thing.
Yeah, certainly the way it was dressed up is all Joshua.
Yeah.
So what was the liquid?
So it's interesting because the liquid, we joke that, in a release like this, people are so excited for the label and the bottle toppers and all this kind of stuff that the label, it could be turpentine inside the bottle. Like nobody would notice, right? But we were like, no, that's not what we do. Like we never put stuff out that we couldn't be proud of on its own. Becky had been working on some R&D projects. As I sit here, I'm looking at some of it on the shelf over there. And she was doing experiments with different woods. So she would take some of our regular roundstone rye that had been aged for 2 years in a Minnesota white oak barrel, right, medium char, blah blah blah, and then she wanted to do some finishing experiments with other wood types. And so we had experimented with about 10 different types of wood. So things as varied as cypress, as sugar maple, cherry wood, and things like that. And so she was adding 2 and 3 different types of wood to those, and then sampling those individually. So she had created different blends. So 10% of this wood and 20% of that wood, different recipes, about 10 different styles. And we have been doing that for a couple of years and didn't really have a home for it, and didn't really have it productized yet. And so when the Guar guys came along, we were like, well, maybe this is an opportunity to do that. And so we sent them basically those samples, 5 or 6 different samples. I can't remember exactly how many. And they sampled them blindly. And then we just gave them code names like ODJ1, ODS3, whatever. And so then when they told us, they unanimously, they all picked the same one, which happened to be the one that was it was white oak and then finished with sugar maple and cherry wood. And what was cool about that was it really played into this consistent story that we've been trying to sort of maintain, which is it was all Virginia. Those are all Virginia native woods, Virginia band, Virginia company for whiskey, all of that kind of fit nicely together. Like it was kismet. So the whiskey is really nice. And with those additional wood notes, you get something that is really, really quite different. In fact, I have a bottle of it here, and we could pour some for you if you like.
Yes.
Okay. I'll have to hit pause.
Should we do that now?
Here, yeah, just hit, or just keep it rolling, I guess. So tell me if you can taste some of the special wood treatment that we've done on that.
Yeah, there's clearly your rye profile is front and center.
Yep. As you always say, there's a Catoctin DNA there. You can tell that's Catoctin.
Oh, yeah. Oh, you could sit and drink that quite easily.
Mm-hmm.
The wood's there, but it's not overpowering.
Right.
You already leading the witness with a blend happening here. You can tell work has been put in on the profile by somebody who knows exactly what they're doing.
It is one of the few whiskeys that we actually do sort of cross-blend across barrels. Normally what we have is a single barrel whiskey. So when Becky did these, she had a sugar maple barrel, and she had a cherry wood barrel, and she had, the regular white oak barrels. And so then she's adding spirit that has aged in that environment. It's not like, we had a barrel and we threw a bunch of those chips into it and it all blended together. So she was able to extract, the sugar maple flavor into a whiskey, and then separately extract the cherry wood flavor into a whiskey, and then blend those together with whiskey that had been untouched by those woods as well. So there's a blend of just white oak with the sugar maple, with the cherry wood, and so that's an interesting process.
It's such a nice sweetness, and I always wonder how much I've been led. You hear sugar maple, and you think, oh, there's a good sweetness, and then the cherry wood, and I can taste a bit of that.
If I start saying things like eggplant and asparagus, what are you going to think?
Yeah, I don't know, but my pee just changed.
It smells.
No, that's really delicious. These are available on the website?
These are available on the website. So we did batch 1. It sold out right away. And so this is batch 2 now on the website, July 19th. So I don't know when this program will air, but...
a little after July 19. We might be into early August with the schedule.
So it'll probably still be available at that time, but if not, batch 3 will be coming. This is, I think, something we're going to regularly keep producing.
That's fantastic. And then for anyone who does get it on the website, you can only ship to them within Virginia.
No. On the website now, we can ship to about 40 states.
Get out of town. Oh, that's great news.
We have a new retail partner on the website. And so they're basically doing the back end for us. And,
fantastic.
And we can ship to most states in the U.S. So
and I'm glad we're having this conversation.
Yeah,
that's excellent.
So catoctincreek.com/shop.
Brilliant. Yeah, please get out and support. Our listeners have been... Joshua and I talk highly of Catoctin Creek early and often.
Oh, that's wonderful. You guys are great.
Supporting with dollar bills is even more important.
That's what keeps the lights on, yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful.
That's right.
Just to pivot back a little bit here, you talked about the direct-to-consumer within Virginia hadn't been codified. Do you think it might? Is there that groundswell that we've been talking about?
It is... as the Scots would say, tetchy.
Okay, I'm with you.
Yeah, it's if there were those of us who would like to see it codified because then it's, law and it can't be changed.
Yeah.
But then, we all work for the ABC, and they don't really want that to happen. And there's other interested parties in politics, lobbies from other industries, beer, wine, restaurants, and things who have maybe interests that are not lined up with that. And so ABC, I think, is trying to balance all of those interests.
Makes sense.
And, there are some of us who would be like, just make it law and then it's final. But if you do that, it's like the nuclear option, and then you have all those lobbyists coming against you, and you might lose the ability to do it at all.
Yes.
So it's touchy. So we're kind of trying to keep the status quo alive. Yeah. The longer I think we continue doing what we're doing, the harder it is to say that doing that was wrong.
And that was the last time we spoke with you, was if the deep concern here is that children will be getting drunk in the streets, that's not happening. What you're able to show now, as opposed to just simply saying, we don't think children are going to get drunk in the streets.
Right.
You're now showing children are not getting drunk in the streets.
Right. And that was always the argument that was used at the national level, at the state level, by those parties. And now they have to come up with some new way, which the real reason is because they don't want to lose money in their pocket because we're getting money in our pocket.
Yep.
But that's not politically what they have to say. So.
Yeah, and walking that fine line with a supporter like the ABC and then in other states with distributors, it is clearly complicated.
And mind you, the ABC is a governmental agency, so they are extremely non-risk taking, right? Everything is very by the book and very much black and white. And so that just is a totally different environment from, a buster, mover, shaker, entrepreneur, risk taker, and those kinds of things. Yeah.
I love the way that you had the hand motions to go with that. That was a full shoulder move you had.
I think I threw something.
You did look pained. I'm still sipping on this guar, and Catoctin Creek is still so present in this. Yeah. Even with the other woods being allowed to tell their story. So, kudos to Becky, kudos to you. Kudos to Guar for this as well.
Yeah.
That's excellent.
Yeah, I think they've been pleased with it.
So as much as you've pulled off that collaboration with Guar during a pandemic, lockdown, shutdown, difficulties, insert word here, you've also been expanding.
Yeah.
And it was actually a nation member of ours saw you posting about breaking ground on some expansion and said, oh, well, we'll have to get One Nation Under Whiskey on this, and we want to hear more about this. It's taken us a few months here, but I'm finally here.
Yep.
I'm sitting at the distillery. Expansion.
Yeah.
Tell all of our listeners. Scream it from the rooftops.
It is exciting and frightening at the same time. I mean, really it is. I am absolutely petrified with fear, and yet it is the next place that we have to go. So, we being fully committed to the batch process, and as we mentioned back at the warehouse, we need bigger pot stills to make more liquid, and so we have planned basically a tripling of our capacity in this building here. So we're in a 6,000 square foot building, but 2,000 of that is tasting room, and then another 2,000 of it is back here in the office. So we have about 2,000 square feet of actual production floor. And people are surprised how small it is. And yet, every drop we've ever made has been made in that very space, right? Except for when we were in a smaller place before. We've never, sourced liquid from MGP or anybody else. And so every drop comes from that room. And so in order to make the expansion work, we have 8 pieces of equipment up there right now. We have Ron, the big still, 100-gallon still. 300-gallon still. We have Barney, the little still that we started with, the 100-gallon still. And then we have the 300-gallon mash tank and 6 300-gallon fermenters. So that's 9 pieces of equipment, not 8. And so as part of the expansion, we're going to replace Barney, the mash tank, and the 6 fermenters with new equipment. So custom built to purpose from specific engineering out of Vancouver, Canada. And so Barney is going to be swapped out for a 600-gallon still, and then a 600-gallon mash tank and 6 600-gallon fermenters. So our total capacity go from about 300 gallons to about 900 gallons, considering we still are having Ron. in there.
Okay.
So same kind of batch process, and it's custom built to fit within the very short sort of headspace that we have in there. And I've measured that space 70 times. Every HVAC and every beam up there is well known at this point. And so then within, by the time this podcast airs, we should be in the replacement of that stuff. So sadly enough, we have to say goodbye to Barney and the mash tank and those fermenters, but we've sold them to a good home in West Virginia, a new distillery starting up that we're going to help get started.
The circle of life.
Yeah. And I mean, Barney's good for another 50 years at least. These things last forever.
Yeah.
And so then we'll get our new still, which is going to be called D-Ron, which is Becky named him Double Ron, and the name stuck. So D-Ron, Ron and D-Ron, and so then they'll be coming in, and then there's some really nice plant improvements that are happening as well. So the first thing is that we've completed replacing our 100-year-old concrete floors, and that was actually. It's not very sexy to talk about concrete floors, but listen, when
you're with friends,
when you have bad concrete floors, it's a problem. So we had 100-year-old floors that were made out of horsehair and chalk, and
of course they were.
They were 1 inch thick. There was no rebar. They were laying directly on top of mud. They had to be, and I was really nervous about replacing them because. This building hadn't been touched. That space hadn't been dug in since the 1800s, right? Wow. And so it is entirely possible we could have found a family plot of graves. I mean, all kinds of things that you could have found there. I was mostly worried about finding a sinkhole, frankly, because there are a lot of springs in Virginia, and you could have a big yawning 6-foot spring underneath your property and not even know it. So when they were busting out the stuff, the workers were really nice because they would work from 3 p.m. until 3 a.m. So through the night, so they didn't interrupt production. And at 1 o'clock in the morning, I'd get on my phone and look at the security cameras and be like, well, there's still some dudes walking around in there. So I guess we don't have a sinkhole, I guess it's all right. Like just nervous, so scared. But now we've got, nice 4-inch, 75 PSI with rebar and all that stuff. So it's our forever floors in there.
So when you took over this building a few years ago now, you're going to say something silly like 6, 7, 8 years ago now.
Yeah, 2013.
Yeah,
so
that's mental. That doesn't make any
8
sense to
ago,
me.
Yeah,
if you'd said 3 years, I would have agreed with you, let alone 8. I remember there was floor work done then to take it from car showroom mechanic style to distilling. Were you also hitting the horsehair?
Yeah, so the floor work at that time was more patchwork. So we were simply, filling potholes, and with a forklift, which is 4,000 pounds of weight, essentially potholes just get worse and worse and worse all the time, and you fill them and then they get worse again. And so and we had a few holes open up, and you would shine a flashlight down them and you didn't see a bottom, and that was where I was worried about sinkholes and things like that. So luckily now we have a floor. Even if there was a sinkhole, the floor will hold itself in place.
Gotcha. And that's the power of rebar.
Yeah, rebar. So it's like in a building or whatever. So yeah, we're in good shape now for that. And so then we had to pour some new pads. So the units are sort of elevated on a 4-inch pad. So we've poured some of those pads for the new equipment. In addition to the pads, then that's the work that's done. We have now also coming in, apart from the D-Ron and the mash tank and the fermenters, we have a 1,200 gallon spent stillage tank. So our current mode of giving our stillage to the farmers is that we will bring out a big plastic blue drum and then raise it up on the forklift out on the community sidewalk, which is our loading zone, and fill their trucks. Well, the new way will be simply just dragging a hose out to the street, and then that's much safer really in the long run. So we'll just pump it from a hose from inside the building.
Well, and that really leads me to another one of my questions, which is you've got this beautiful facility in downtown Purcellville. It looks like your walls can't go anywhere in either direction.
No.
And so as you're thinking about expansion and as you're thinking of this, to my mind, and please do correct me when I'm wrong, not if I'm wrong, this, to my mind, is your third expansion?
I think so, yeah.
Large scale.
Large scale expansion. Right. That's not just some piecemeal thing.
Right.
Yeah, so the facility that we have is the facility we have, right? And so this will always be the facility we have. If you look at The one example that jumps to mind is Yuengling, right? So if you've ever been to Pennsylvania near Reading, the Yuengling plant, which is I think the oldest American independently owned brewery.
I think so, yeah.
Right?
I think so.
It's an archaic 200-year-old building, and it's wood, and they, have the mashing at the top, and everything gravity feeds down every story below it until they get to bottling at the bottom. But it's very small. Like, it's as big as us here right now. And so you're like, Yuengling's a huge brand. That's no way they're making all that. And of course, you learn when you ask enough questions on the tour that their main production is in Tampa Bay in some big industrial building that looks like a data center, right? That nobody would ever know. So of course it is. For us, what we've done for our production is, for the time being, and that could be 10 years even, we will do production here on Main Street in Purcellville. But we bought a long time ago now, it's probably been 3 or 4 years now even, a 15,000 square foot building in Berryville, right? You saw it today. And so it is divided into 6 different bays, each one about 2,000 square feet. And 2,500 square feet or something like that. And so right now we're using 2 of those bays, one for barrel storage and we're using one for dry goods. And there are other bays that now presently are being leased out to, plumbers and, other businesses. Well, that's our expansion plan. So if you follow our workflow today in the distillery, we mash here, we ferment here. So we start with the grain, we mash, we ferment, we distill, right? We get the new make spirit. We fill the barrels here, and then the barrels transit out to the warehouse 12 miles away. We deposit them for storage, and then we pick up the ones that are ready, bring them back here, bring them down in proof, and bottle them here. So the product goes here, 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 out there, and then back here. And then it ships from here to Richmond or, New Jersey or wherever it's going. Okay, well, so the first logical expansion then would be to move the bottling operations out there, right? So it's all treated under the same bond. So it's all under the same distillery license. But then we would basically take the product, fill the new make barrels here, bring the barrels out there to age. And when it's time to bottle, instead of bringing them back here, just do it there, right? Bottle it and then ship it from there. So you don't have to make the double journey back. So that's probably the first thing. That would free up what's today our bottling space here, that we could do something else with that space here. And we have the space out there. All we'd really need to install out there would be the bottling line and some compressed air and a few sort of infrastructure things to do that.
So obviously, we should never say never, and I'm not going to commit you to the podcast recording today, but it sounds like you would like to keep distillation in Purcellville.
I believe we could.
Seems like you can work your square footage. I don't see a reason
why we don't have to be able to do that for some time to come. If we get to the point where we need to quadruple again, right, then we got to think of something new, right? Either we go up, right, get a column still and literally bust through the roof.
Yep.
There's probably zoning issues with that, I mean, being in a historic part of town and everything. Or we, today we are licensed fully to operate every aspect of the business in that Berryville location.
Okay.
So tomorrow I could start distilling out there. I'm fully licensed to do so.
Gotcha.
We just have chosen not to do that yet. So right now it's just storage, but that's the growth plan. That's the long-term vision for what we would be doing.
Fantastic. No, it sounds buttoned up, and in the 10 years we've known you,
I'm glad you think so.
Collaborated.
It's frightening as hell to me.
Well, every day you get to see how the sausage is made. I just get to see the delicious sausage.
Right. The other cool things that are in this expansion that I didn't mention, apart from the stillage tank, is we're getting a massive new glycol system. So today we've been using all tap water for cooling, and that is extremely expensive, right? So this glycol system, though it is a big, heavy, expensive system, will pay for itself in water savings over the next 3 years. And so it's essentially a closed loop glycol system, 430 gallon system. That's a big system, like a data center size system. That's basically going to be chilling all the stills and the fermenters and the mash tank all simultaneously. So,
okay. I appreciate you've paused because you can see the look on my face that our listeners cannot. How's that working? Is there like a refrigeration unit on that?
in the driveway here is a large pad about the size of a Volkswagen minibus. Okay, so quite large.
Okay.
And it is just like an HVAC. It's like an air conditioner, except it's chilling the fluid, right? So you get 430 gallons of glycol, which is ethylene glycol, which is antifreeze that you use in your car, right? It has a freezing temperature lower than water. So you can chill the glycol to below water's freezing level, and it's still liquid, and that's why they like it, because you can pump it and you can freeze a tank of wine or something like that solid if you need to. So basically you spend all the energy to chill down 400 odd gallons of ethylene glycol to a very cold temperature, say 40 degrees Celsius, 40 degrees Fahrenheit, so 10 degrees Celsius perhaps.
Okay.
And then that you pump into the stills, into the cooling, into the condenser, right? So it never comes in contact with the liquid.
Sure,
It's in the condenser, and then that's what causes the condensation. Well, the process of that in the still heats the glycol back up,
Sure.
at which point it circulates back into the glycol tank where the condenser kicks on and keeps that stuff running cold. And so there's a lot of calculations that had to be done with the BTUs, and the engineering companies like, okay, well, how much volume do you have, and how hot is it, and how quickly do you need to drop it, and all that stuff. And they do the calculations, and they said you need a big fucking system.
And I was going to ask you that question as well, because if in talking to Becky, and we've had on other episodes, and we discussed in the warehouse today, Becky is so hell-bent on keeping Catoctin Creek. To my mind, you've now just changed how the C word. It's not condensation. It's how it turns back from the gas to the liquid.
Condensation. It is.
It is condensation.
Yes,
okay,
it is.
So you're changing how that condenses from gas to liquid.
Not really, because all you're doing is cooling the spirit, right? So whether you're cooling that with water or cooling that with your blood, I mean, whatever it is, as long as that spirit cools from steam to liquid is what you're trying to get.
But it seems like with these glycol numbers, you could chill it rapidly.
Yeah.
You could pass a larger volume. Yeah.
But we're only passing spirit through in a parsimonious way, right? So we're still boiling it in such a manner that only the spirit that we want to come through comes through, right? And we can control the temperature of the glycol just like we control the temperature of the water.
Yes.
In the deflegmator at the top of the still. And so that's the real key, is just the deflegmator temperature. And so you can run that hotter or colder by letting it linger longer in the still or not. Those are the things.
And that's the part I was kind of chasing there.
I will say we do see, because we use tap water, we do see seasonal variations in the water temperature, right? In the winter,
sense.
the water in the water tower is ice cold, and in the summertime, it's a little more lukewarm. And that does affect our efficiency in the distillation. So Becky always says she loves distilling in the winter because the water is ice cold and things just get done quicker, right? So you don't have to wait around all damn day, especially when cooling the mash tank, right? You're trying to get a boiling hot kettle of 300 gallons of mash to cool down to room temperature. That takes longer when the ambient temperature of the water is 20 degrees warmer.
Well, and for our home brewers out there, right? It's
same thing.
It's a different volume,
Yeah.
but it's the same thing,
Yeah.
right? It's good to brew in the winter because you can cool down your mash, which
Right.
then turns down, hopefully, the risk of contamination, and you can get your yeast pitched sooner.
Right.
Like
And you don't
makes
spend all
sense.
damn day in the distillery.
Exactly,
Yeah.
right. That
so
makes sense.
That should be something. And then with the glycol, presumably, we'll find out, of course, but you remove that seasonal variation, and we should be able to get a nice optimal. And in fact, it should be so optimal that we can do 2 runs in a day instead of just 1.
There you go.
So
There
that could be quite nice.
Well, and now you're turning your square footage into a double use, and now you've just doubled your volume without doubling your square footage.
And or employees, like we can double the volume without hiring twice as many people. And that's expensive to do so.
Yeah, we just had this conversation the last couple of months with Lee and Bree Atwood at Backwoods Distilling in Yakandanda, Australia, Victoria, Australia. And anytime I talk to them, I'm always saying, you guys remind me so much of Scott and Becky up at Catoctin Creek. And to listen to finite space that you're looking to maximize volume
Right.
and output, and how that looks with multiple shifts and square footage and glycol condensers. Like
Right.
this, I so love talking to you and learning all this stuff.
The last cool thing that I'll tell you about in the equipment that we are getting
Please.
is a grain auger.
Ooh.
So if you were an astute observer, you will have noticed we moved all of our grain handling over to the back corner of the building back there.
You know, when I walk through this building, I only have eyes for you. I'm not looking at anything else.
That's why I'm mentioning it now. So so anyway, we moved all of our grain handling, and so we had these control rooms, which we were originally using for just storage of like drums and barrels and things that were in the way. And so these are tiny little rooms about the size of a large walk-in closet, right? But they're fully ventilated, and they had, doors on them. Well, as it turns out, one of those is perfect for grain handling, because grain is dusty, dirty stuff, right?
Yeah.
So our today grain handling procedure is Becky would take a mash bill of different ryes, right? We are 100% rye, but she'll pull from different farms to get a complexity of flavor. So 30% from Rappahannock, 20% from Loudon, 20% from Lancaster, those building that profile. And so that would mean taking 50-pound bags from each of those farms, 6 of those, 2 of those, and 3 of those, or whatever. And then we would put them on a pallet, lift them up on the forklift next to the mash tank, right? And then some guy would mount a ladder and slice the bags open and dump them in from the forklift, there's danger involved. You've got a big piece of forklift next to the tank. You've got a guy on a ladder and all those kinds of things. So what we decided to do is we got a hopper, and in that room, then we'll simply walk 6 feet from where the grain is stored into the room with a single 50-pound bag, and you lay it on top of the hopper. The hopper has like a grill, like a barbecue grill, right? You just lay it on the grill, slice it, and everything will fall into the hopper.
Nice.
Right? Then you throw the bag away. Easy. And it contains all the grain dust in that room, so we don't have the whole building filled with freaking grain dust like it is today.
Nice.
And then an auger, which is basically like a big screw drive inside of a PVC pipe, will carry the grain all the way up and around the building and drop it right into the mash tank.
Is the auger the Archimedes screw? Is that?
It's kind of like that. Yeah. The way he
Similar?
described it is kind of a deconstructed slinky. If you pull a slinky apart and place it inside,
okay.
and then it turns.
Yes,
and
yes.
It feeds that grain along the pipe.
That's the part.
Yeah, it's like a screw. Exactly. And so that will be our new grain filling. And so you simply will, turn on the mash tank, begin agitating the hot water, and then go fill the hopper with all the grain, and then walk back over, and lo and behold, it's all good and ready to go.
What a game changer for everybody on the floor here.
Yeah,
I love hearing
a lot less back, bending work and that kind of stuff. Yeah. So it's another improvement in safety and in everything else. And it's not actually that expensive either. These systems are pretty affordable.
Okay.
So.
Well, one of the things you had me thinking about earlier is this tap water, and one of the things that I hear going around Scotland is this reclaiming of the water that's used and these kind of environmental leanings. At Catoctin Creek, you've been environmentally minded for a long time, and almost to such a degree that I sometimes forget that you've got solar panels the length of your roof.
Yeah.
And you're
44,000 watts.
Are you 100% powered?
80%.
80% powered by that solar.
Yeah.
But now here you are. Your water situation's going to change. You're not going to have to be.
Well, so we always try to make the best of what we're doing at the moment, right? And so all of our water that we use for condensation and cooling in the stills, we would collect in drums, and that water became the mash water for the next day. So the water's already pretty close to boiling when you get it anyway, right? So there's not a lot of energy then spent to heat it up to boiling for mashing. And B, you don't want to throw that water down the drain and then fill the tank with an equal quantity of new water, right? So we've been able to make use of that water without wasting it, which is good that we did. In this new operation, we will still use a lot of water for mashing. Obviously, you have to use water for mashing, but we won't use as much for cooling. So, because otherwise we'd have a triple the amount of water used, for cooling than what we're using today.
Are there other places where you're fine tuning? I feel like you've done a lot of broad strokes on your kind of environmental awareness. Are there little places that you either are fine tuning or that you'd like to fine tune?
We have spent a lot of time focusing on, environmental stuff and little tweaks here and there all the time. Every little thing that we can recycle, from office paper to whatever, gets recycled, and things that we can reuse. But maybe the most interesting thing that my architect told me, and he was a big part of designing this plant, was, we were talking about the solar panels and all this efficiency and things that we're doing that are green and sustainable. And he says, the greenest thing you ever did was reuse that old building. He said, a lot of times you take a 100-year-old building and you level it, all that stuff goes to landfill, and then you use all these new materials to build it. He's like, the use of that old Buick dealership is by and far the biggest green thing you did in the whole operation.
And talk about something nobody would consider.
Right. And it's like, oh, it's a pretty building. Yeah, it's neat. It's cool. It's got some history. Yes, and it's extremely green to reuse something that's already standing. So
that's very cool.
Yeah.
I like that a lot. I'm going to go from the good and exciting stuff to the less good and exciting stuff.
Okay.
But it's not a visit with Scott Harris or even a phone call with Scott Harris if we haven't discussed, and by this point I think we just call them fucking tariffs. Joshua and I have been celebrating the Scotch coming over here. Those tariffs have gone away.
Yeah, we haven't gotten the quid pro quo yet.
Right, there's a lot of distilled products that can now leave the United States without reciprocal tariffs. Right. But you, as a whiskey producer, still have your 25% tariffs going into Europe. Do you have a sense of why that's the case? What's going on? And what will it take to get those to go the way of the dodo?
I think we're working on it. As I said before, but I would have said we never will see the tariffs go away under the old administration, right? The old administration used tariffs as a policy tool. And the new administration is somewhat hamstrung by the old administration's things, right? So the problem is we got 3 different tariffs that are in place, right? There's the steel aluminum tariffs, there's the Boeing Airbus dispute, and there's the whiskey tariffs, right? So the whiskey tariffs on American whiskey in Europe are retaliatory for the American positions on steel, aluminum, and Boeing Airbus, which sucks because it's like, I don't care about airplanes and steel.
Yep.
I just want to sell whiskey.
Yep.
But they know that's where the levers of power are, right? Well, I guess the American aluminum and steel workers are really happy with those tariffs in place, and that's a traditionally Democratic contingency. And so it's become politically difficult to undo those tariffs, even though they, research shows they don't really help any. That American steel jobs are not here because we're not doing that as much anymore. It's like saving coal. Like, there's not that much coal to save. All these plants are going to natural gas for a reason, and it's not because coal is dirty. So anyway, there's the little bit of politics, but nevertheless, those steel aluminum tariffs are harder to remove than they were to put in place, and therefore the whiskey tariffs are still in place, quid pro quo for that. Now, we have seen some positive directions. They were set to double in June to 50%, right? And so Catherine Tai, the U.S. trade representative who works for President Biden, has been negotiating, I think, in good faith to let's all get to a place where we're trade partners again and not trade adversaries. And so they suspended that 50% doubling that was going to happen. So that's good because that would have absolutely killed all American whiskey business in Europe. And they're working, I think, to remove the 25% tariff, but it has not been removed yet. So we wait more and more. We wait.
And there are no whispers there of it could be a little bit, it could be a bit more.
I will say for the first time we have reasons for optimism and hope. In the last administration, it was like, screw it. This is what's going to be. There's not going to be a change unless there's a change of presidency. I think with this new administration, there is reason to hope that they're working towards it. I think they want to see Europe as a valuable partner.
Sure.
It's not all transactional, So there's reason for hope, but they're not gone until they're gone. So, and it's like sort of the direct-to-consumer shipping. The longer it lasts in place, the more permanent it can end up being, right?
Yeah, it becomes harder to remove them when they've got a backstory.
When they've been there 6, 7, 8 years now or whatever.
Oh, that would be terrible.
Yeah.
So are you are you still doing business in Europe? You're not growing the business in Europe?
We're not growing the business in Europe. Europe was a key focus for growth for us pre-tariff, and it's been basically stagnant since then. Yeah. So we have some new business over there. We actually started selling in the UK, and it's remains to be seen what the UK is going to do on their own, because they had Brexit to deal with, right? Well, as my UK distributor said, the UK office for tariffs, whatever they're called, is new, right? They had to create it because it's not EU anymore, right? And so they want to get this absolutely right. So they're being very diligent in what they're doing, which means they haven't decided anything yet. It's taking a long time. Mm-hmm. Are they going to go tariff-free with the US, or are they going to keep the European things in place? We don't know. And so there's a big lobby in Britain to basically abolish the whiskey tariffs for Britain. Like, okay, we're not EU, so why should we have those tariffs? Let's have a trade deal with the US and have most favored between us. But that is not the case today either. So again, Brexit and EU and tariffs, all of that crap came together in a perfect storm of crap for whiskey producers.
So given that on one hand, yes, you have to be patient here, and on one hand, yes, you hope these do go away eventually, you're still a young man running a business over here. Have you made maneuver? And obviously, this is all happening under COVID and a global pandemic as well. Are you able to carve out other markets? Are there other places where you've turned your attention and said this could, in its own right, be a Catoctin Creek market?
Yeah, so in light of that, we expanded into Canada and Mexico, right? So we have some trade pacts with those countries. And of course, we did Mexico right before COVID. I literally did the launch like in November of 19.
Okay.
And then by January and February, we're into COVID. So, that was poor timing on my part, not knowing that there was going to be a global pandemic.
We're not going to hold that one against you.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't see it coming at all.
What kind of business owner are you? You didn't see a global pandemic coming.
I didn't have that one in my risk mitigation matrix. So Mexico and then Canada, of course, also a country we can do business with. But frankly, our business in the U.S. has been strong and seems to be on an upward trend. So, I think we have enough business that we could just sell here in the U.S. and be happy with that, should we need to. And I've got a few things up my sleeve for Europe too. So there's some opportunities in Europe that I think can sidestep the tariffs.
Ways to make it work.
I think we'll make do with. Yeah.
Well, and you just brought up the United States there, and I was about to ask you that question. Is you're 10 years into this, if I'm remembering my numbers correctly. Your numbers match our numbers. This so-called craft industry, as you're talking earlier about our little still that has served us from day one, that took on a secondary role as we grew, is now off for a life, not quite upstate, but neighboring state. It's going to the farm in a neighboring state.
That's right. It's going to live out its life on a farm. Yeah.
And I made the comment circle of life. But what are you seeing for this industry that we call the craft distilling industry? Do you think that name even fits for the industry? Yeah. And are you seeing a separation of, obviously there's the Kentucky big boys who are doing their thing, but then there's also this, for me, this next level down are the industries who started up around those 2010s, give or take 5 years, and I hope I don't offend anybody with that one. But they're now in a place where somebody who came in 2018 and 2021 isn't in.
Yeah.
Writ large.
Yeah. So I do think there are sort of three levels of strata, if you will. The term craft, I'll just say it here, it's kind of a caveat, is a loaded term, right? So the big guys don't like to use the word craft because what they do is crafty. If you visited Woodford Reserve, you see, they spend labor over their barrels, and they do a good job of what they do, and they, make the spirit. They just make it bigger and sell more of it. So, it is, I think, a proper criticism of using the word craft that, the big guys do good stuff. And unlike the beer industry, the whole craft beer industry started because the big guys made pish, right? I mean, they really did, right? Nobody liked Budweiser. Nobody liked Coors Light. And so that's where craft came in and said, let's make big, bolstery, flavorful beers, right? But we never had that in the whiskey industry, right? The big guys, whether it be Scotch or bourbon, always made really good quality stuff,
Yeah.
right? And so what was the value proposition for a small producer? So like it or not, the word craft has come to be synonymous with small producer, right? That's just what it is. So accepting that, because that's what people are doing, then what makes us different is the ability to do things the big guys won't do, can't do. And so, for example, making a pot stilled rye whiskey from Virginia terroir, right? You're not going to get that from a big guy. You're only going to get that from Catoctin Creek. And when people taste our stuff, they say, this doesn't taste like rye whiskey. And I'm like, well, of course it tastes like rye whiskey. It's 100% rye. This is what Virginia rye tastes like, And so, because 90% of what they had came from MGP, different bottles, different labels, but it was all MGP. So they thought all rye must taste like dill.
Yep.
Right?
95.5.
And ours doesn't. And so that's, to me, sort of, my definition of craft now is that we're doing something special, handcrafted, smaller scale than what the big guys are doing. But I still want to say, I have the big respect for what the big guys are doing, because they obviously, I would like to be one someday.
Seems like the goal.
The other aspect of your question, then, I sort of see kind of three strata, right? So we have the big guys, Brown-Forman and Diageo, and those guys doing their thing, right? And then there's the little guys who are starting today, okay? And I'll talk about that in a second. And then there's where we are, sort of the alumni who've been at it for about 10, 15 years, right? So Tuttletown, us, Few, Koval, you can sort of name off Dad's Hat, the guys who've been doing this for a while and doing a good job of it and still here today, right?
Yep.
Because there are some who aren't. And so that level, that middle strata, I believe we came in at a time when there were opportunities available that aren't available today.
And that's what my question was getting at.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, go on.
So basically, like distribution opportunities, right? So we, at the time, couldn't sell on site. We couldn't sell in the state except through the ABC system. We couldn't, sell in a store. We couldn't do tastings. So we had to do wholesale. And so we did. And so we chose a business plan that put our whiskey at wholesale out to distributors. And once you get one or two, then you can get three or four, and you start to do that. And distributors at the time were interested in new craft brands. They didn't have a lot in their book. And so they were willing to take on new companies. And so then all the companies, like I just mentioned, basically, peppered across the nation in 10 or 12 states each, and began to show up in some of the nice big, places like Binny's in Chicago and, Julio's in Massachusetts. And so, So that's kind of how that happened. And so we kind of got in on the ground floor of the craft movement. And it's cool that we're kind of still here today. And we've sort of etched out some space for ourselves that we have now been able to sort of claim. Now, if you're starting today, that's nearly impossible. Nearly impossible, right? Distributors are not taking on new brands. Many distributors have closed. Many have merged into bigger distributors, right? And brands have consolidated. And so it's just a really hostile environment for a totally new brand to come onto the market unless you have millions of dollars in marketing spends that you can convince the distributors that you're going to do well with. You're just not going to get started. You're never going to get started. So the business model that works for the distillers today is the local pub model. And so that's what I'm seeing. Even in Virginia, it's like you have to have a tasting room and you have to have a business plan that you can sell everything. All the money you're going to make is out of your tasting room. And maybe you can park yourself on a really busy highway like I-81 or I-95, in some touristy town like Gatlinburg, Tennessee, or something like that where you can get a ton of foot traffic.
Yeah.
And then I think you can be quite successful with that. But it's a different business model from the wholesale national kind of aspirations.
Do you think, like a Daisy Through Concrete, one or two of that style of craft distiller could go national?
I do. If they make something truly special, unique, and well done, then you can get noticed and go national. But I think you have to do that successfully first. And I think that's the gatekeeping that's happening now. I think it's going to be rare to see a brand just pop into the radar. I'll give you an example. Uncle Nearest.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
So famous Fawn Weaver. She is a marketing genius. She had a lot of capital. She had a lot of venture capital from Wall Street, investors that invested in her company. And she's a genius at what she does. Well, she created a brand out of whole cloth, right? It has an amazing story attached to it, and so she was able to do that and get the attention and respect of those big distributors and get herself into national distribution pretty much overnight. That's a unicorn.
But I think of the corollary with the NFL. And in my time briefly with Washington State University, we had an educator there who would tell football players, you have a college player has a 4% chance of going on to the NFL. And you're at Washington State University. You're not at Alabama. You're not at Florida.
Right.
You're at Washington State University. And each of those football players at Washington State University believed they would be the one who would make it to the NFL.
Well, it's the same thing in high school. Every kid in high school thinks he's going to get to college on a soccer or a lacrosse scholarship,
right?
And it's just not going to happen.
And so it strikes me that within the ongoing craft distilling scene, you could say to someone, look, you're going to have to get it through your tasting room. You're going to have some unique project. But the reason entrepreneurs are entrepreneurs is they believe they will be the daisy through concrete, the college player in the NFL.
I have said it before. I mean, the words I used was I believed everything I was doing was ordained by God. So I really did. I really did. I thought that the waters were parting in front of me, that problems were falling away because it was my mission.
Wow.
God wants me to make whiskey. And it's a bit of a delusion, really, but
sure.
It's the delusion that drives you. You can do no wrong, and eventually that's replaced with tedious monotony. But there is the entrepreneur. You're right. The entrepreneur is almost mentally broken in thinking that what they can do and they can do anything, and that's where you get some of the hard knocks. Honestly, you make something you say is absolutely amazing, fantastic, gorgeous, and then for the first time you show it in Sacramento, right, someplace that they've never heard of you, and they don't want to drink it, and they walk over to the table and drink some peanut butter flavored whiskey instead, and you're like, ugh. and then you have deep dark nights, in the hotel room. I've been there.
Yeah, I'm laughing on the inside and dying on the inside. I'm laughing on the outside and dying on the inside.
Yeah.
That's painful stuff. Yeah. Painful. Well, in the interest of getting us out of here, and we are going to transition over to the second part of this chat. And we'll get to hear a little bit more from Becky in the second part of this chat. But just very quickly, as we get out of here, you've teased it as we've gone along. And I ask you this question every time I see you. What's exciting, but not even in the distant future? What's immediately exciting for Scott and Becky Harris and the team at Catoctin Creek?
Well, certainly the equipment install is imminently upon us, and we're going to have a very busy time of that with forklifts and rigging equipment and all that stuff. So it's like building on an extension to your house, right? That's quite exciting. And once you get it, it'll be exciting because it's all here and we can take pictures and put it on social media and all that stuff. So that's really good. Beyond that, I am rather bullish on 2022, 2023. I do believe we're coming out of this pandemic. I think people are getting vaccinated and the worst days are behind us. I feel bad for those who won't get vaccinated because I think there's some really reasons for concern with some of the variants coming out. But in this community that we're in, everybody's vaccinated, and so life is returning to normal, and that's really, really wonderful. And I do believe, people talk about the roaring 20s, right, after the 1918 pandemic, and I think we're seeing signs of that now. People want to come out. They want to spend money. They want to enjoy life, right? They spent a year cooped up wondering what the meaning of life was, and now it's bacchanalia, right? And I really think that's coming. And so I'm really, really bullish on that. We're starting to see some early numbers that support that. So we are excited by that, and it would be nice to lock in a couple really good years after a really, really tough year.
Absolutely, yeah. You're seeing people coming back to the tasting room, taking bottles off your shelves.
Yeah, I'll give you a hard just kind of put it in terms. Pre-COVID, we would get, we had the room set at like 50 people, right? It's a small tasting room, 50 people max. And so we would get a certain revenue per week on that 50 people that came in. During COVID then, when we were locked down, when people were allowed in there, we were locked down at 25 people, so half capacity. Mm-hmm. And yet we were seeing the same revenue from the half the people.
Interesting.
And so that meant half the people were buying twice as much. And now that we've been able to add more people back, well, that has stuck. So people are buying more as they're coming back. And I don't totally understand it, but it's
don't fight it.
It's wonderful to see. It really is. And maybe it's just people weren't affiliated with the brand before, and then they tried it and they really liked it, and now they like it and they're buying it more often. Or I don't even know, but our message is getting out there and the whiskey is selling, and so that's really, really nice.
But also, and I say this as a close outsider, look what you're doing for Virginia. Look how you're representing Virginia. Yeah. And to think about people in Virginia coming out and supporting that. Yeah. That's an aspect that would make sense to me as somebody who shares the state with you and sees how you're viewed and talked about and thought of. So that part makes sense to me.
Definitely, I mean, that's our whole identity. We are the Virginia Rye Whiskey, and we're trying very hard to show the rest of the world why is this really special, and this birthplace of American whiskey, and here's a taste of what that is.
Well, the thing that Joshua and I always say to you and Becky is we've loved you for a decade, and we continue to love you, and watching The Expanse is brilliant. You're good people doing good things and supporting families along the way.
Yeah.
And we love collaborating with you.
Oh, thanks guys. It's always been such fun.
Cheers, my man.
Cheers.
Thanks to Scott for his time. I'd been hanging out with him and Becky for a while. They're both incredibly busy people. We've said it about Becky numerous times previously. If you can get Becky to sit down for 10 minutes, I think you've achieved something major. And we had talked about her coming in and sitting down with me and Scott for a bit of time, and it just didn't work out for her, just the way the day was going. However, I did have the opportunity to spend time in the warehouse with both of them, pulling a sample of our collaboration. One of our Spirit of Collaboration projects that we've got going on with Scott and Becky. And it's a cask that you and I have been talking about before on the podcast.
Yeah.
We've certainly made no secret of it. People in the nation have certainly been asking us, is that coming? Is that coming? Is that coming? So I'm going to say a little bit about it just to bring everyone up to speed. Then we're going to go into the recording, and then you and I will come back and taste.
That's much better. I like that. I want to hear what the three of you have to say. And then that'll be a good reference point. Good.
So for anybody joining us for the very first time, we took, and I'm about to say this to Becky as my first question, but I'll say it here anyway. We took 2 Catoctin Creek no cuts casks, the only 2 casks they have in their facility that were produced without cuts. And in a moment, Becky's going to explain that process.
Okay, good. I was going to ask you to explain, but good.
Right.
Yep.
Those no cuts casks were matured for, again, 15 months, 18 months, something like that. And then you and I, Single Cask Nation, brought in an ex-Pedro Jimenez hogshead from Kilchoman Distillery, as we were just talking about Kilchoman earlier in this episode.
Yep.
And we combined the 2 30-gallon no-cuts casks, which were new charred oak, into this ex-Kilchoman PX Hoggy. At the time of tasting, which would have been July 2021, these 2 casks had been combined since September of 2019.
Yes.
Yep. So not quite 2 years, but getting there. Yep. And when the 3 of us taste this in the warehouse, the listeners are going to hear the very first moment the glass comes to our nose, touches our palate, There was no pre-gaming here. We pulled the sample, we poured it, and then we hit record on the microphones.
And what's the last iteration that you tasted prior to this? Was it when you and I were in Kentucky, September of 2020?
Potentially, and I do say this in the recording that I really can't quite remember. I also remember there being a January, but I don't know if it was January of this year or January of last year. But there was a sample that had us questioning the trajectory of maturation.
Yeah.
And
yes. Yep.
And we talk a little bit about that in this segment as well. So this segment runs maybe 20 minutes or so, just the three of us having a chat about this particular whiskey and maturation in their warehouse.
We're standing in the Catoctin Creek warehouse. I'm surrounded by barrels. Even better than that, I'm surrounded by Scott and Becky Harris, which...
Surrounded.
That's how I'm feeling standing in this corner here with the barrels around me. We are here to taste the collaboration that we've been working on for a little while here. We've got Catoctin Creek No Cuts Rye, 2 30-gallon casks of that combined into a Kilchoman ex-sherry hogshead. It's 59 gallons. We've been talking about that. Becky, before we pull this up to our noses, before we jump into this, the liquid's beautifully dark, I'm seeing. When we talk about this Catoctin Creek No Cuts, that was a special project you did. You discussed it on a previous episode. Would you mind refreshing our listeners on what the No Cuts Catoctin Creek is all about, please?
Right. So what we were doing in this particular run was we wanted to simulate essentially what it would be like to run our mash, our beer, through a simulated beer still. And when you're running it through his beer still, you don't necessarily make those cuts. And so it's a way to kind of decide, do I want to do that, or do I really want to stay with like the pot still type of? So we were doing it as an experiment. And so we just ran it all through at top speed, go through, and then thought we'd see what it was like. And it was really interesting to taste it, but it wasn't at all necessarily like our normal stuff. And so that was why it was kind of like a little experiment that was hanging around.
And why were you looking to do a no cuts Catoctin Creek?
We had a conversation with Larry Ebersold, who used to be the master distiller when it was Seagram's, back when MGP was Seagram's. And he was, his... one of the things he talked about was that, as you grow, it's like kind of there's not a good economic argument to stay with pot still distillation, because what takes me 9 hours to do goes through a beer still in about 3 minutes. And so he was, kind of, that's his whole background, is working with beer stills. And so his contention was, you guys should really look at this from an economic standpoint. And, the economic argument you can't really refute. But what you can refute is the difference in flavor between pot still distillation and beer still distillation. It's not that one is better or worse, but they're different. And so as a company, we felt like it was important to try to do something that the big guys don't want to do, especially with rye.
And I think in the earlier episode, when we were talking about this, you talked about that level of control that you get with your own still. And you can really, and these aren't your words, you would never speak like this. These are my words, where you could put your personality, your stamp. But maybe the easier way to talk about it is the Catoctin Creek style is more controllable when you're fully hands-on than when you're just running it through this so-called beer still.
Right, agreed. And I would also say that one of the interesting things is, there have been some discussions of late on like the whole 3-chamber still type of thing, that what Leopold brothers did their 3-chamber rye. And Todd Leopold talks about how, the design of that still is supposed to facilitate the kind of distillation from a mash that has very little alcohol left at the bottom, because of course those are the 3 different chambers. And what's interesting about pot still distillation, and specifically about the way we run our rye, is that a certain chunk of our distillation time is spent toward the end, and the spirit's coming up very slowly, and we're mostly distilling stuff from a very low percentage of the alcohol left in the mash. And he talks about it being really important to get that texture and stuff. And to me, I feel like that's really kind of resonated with me, because I felt like that was really important part of our way of running our stills, is that a big portion of it is pulling out a relatively small amount of alcohol, but it's toward the end. And you're really kind of getting these concentrated flavors that have been cooking for a while. And so there's, when you cook something for a while, it doesn't taste the same as when you first start cooking it.
Sure.
And so I like to think of it as getting the essence of that mash that's been cooking for a while. That brings out other flavors, other esters, other oils, all those things are coming out at the end, and that gives you texture and flavor and goodness. And so I feel like I when he was talking about it, when I was watching his thing, I was really resonating, because I felt like that was the same thing we're doing in a different way.
This is Scott. The analogy that I use to understand this, what we do, and I really want to sort of emphasize what Becky said about doing something that the big guys aren't willing to do, right? This 9-hour run. And that cooking reaction is really, really important then to the batch process. And it's not just about, 2 different ways of removing the alcohol. We are, in fact, changing the mash as it's in there. It's cooking and changing. And so the analogy that I really find useful is if you think about tomato sauce, right? So if you go out to your garden and you gather, a dozen tomatoes, right? Then you puree them in a blender and drink it right away. It's going to taste very acidic, very bright, very watery. But then if you cook it on the stove for 9 hours on low heat, right, it's going to change, right? It's going to reduce. It's going to caramelize. There's all kinds of things. So a tomato sauce that's cooked on the stove for 9 hours is not the same thing as those bright, purely pureed tomatoes. And that's what's happening to the rye mash. So we're getting congeners that have changed because of what's happening inside the pot during that 9-hour run. And that's something unique to our stuff and why it tastes the way it does.
That's brilliant. And so there were only the 2 barrels from the no cuts experiment.
Yeah, that's correct, because we just did it once, and we gave it a try. We all tasted it. We tasted it a couple times while it was in the 30-gallon barrels, and we were just like, yeah, we can see that it's there, but it's really not the direction we wanted to go philosophically.
Yeah, that makes good sense. And the 2 30-gallon casks, were they straight up new charred oak? Was there anything special going on with them?
Nothing special. They were kind of our standard barrels that we were using at the time, which I believe was the Minnesota oak.
Yeah, Minnesota white oak.
Okay, and then in September of 2019, we combined, I say we, this is the royal we. I have the video.
You were there.
I have the video of you 2 working while I was a spectator. We combined the 2 30-gallons into the 59-gallon ex-Kilchoman Hoggy. And how long has it been out here in this particular warehouse? Do you recall? Is that
just under? We were just discussing whether it's so September of 19. So a year and 10 months.
Okay.
A year and 10 months out here.
And I think we last tasted it, Joshua and I, and you, Scott, in January of this year. Does that make sense that a sample was pulled then?
Right, yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
And one of the things we said at that time, and why I'm so excited, and I have not put my nose in this, I have not tasted this as it's sitting in a glass in front of me.
I can attest to that.
I'm so eager. The thing that Josh and I were hopeful of coming from January, where we were only 3-4 weeks into the winter, we thought if we could get another spring on this, if we could hop into a hot Virginia summer on this, we might pull more of that smoke out, more of that sherry out, have this be a bit more expressive. What I'm also curious with you, Becky, is in listening to how you talked about texture and what you normally see from Catoctin Creek and where the no cuts went, is this still recognizable to you as Catoctin Creek? Because goodness knows, we've done a lot to this now.
It's been a trip.
So let's lift our glasses.
We'll
Let's give a cheers, because it's wonderful to see the three of you.
Wonderful.
The three of you. The three of you. There's only two of you and I haven't even had a drink yet. It's wonderful.
The royal three of us.
It's wonderful for
The
the
whiskey is a person.
I'm excited to have the three of us back together again. That's what I'm
True.
saying very poorly.
Oh, hot damn, that's good.
Yeah, first of all, the color is this wonderful, rich ruby, the sanguine copper. The oils in the glass are pronounced, something we always look for in anything in a Single Cask Nation bottle. And obviously you guys at Catoctin Creek are known for good texture as well.
Copper is a good description. That's
Right.
almost the same color as the stills.
I love it when it goes in that direction. The nose... Becky, are you drinking much in the way of Isla whiskies?
I haven't recently. No, I think I'm a little low on them. I was looking at our shelf the other day, and we need to restock.
We've got a big bottle of Octomore that we rarely touch.
Oh, there you go.
But it's
get
smoky
into
as
it.
hell.
Get into it. So you were saying sweet was one
To
of your
me,
first
I get,
takeaways
this
here.
is a very sweet nose to me.
Do you think the sherry on that is coming through a little more?
Maybe that's what it is. I get this really gorgeous. I mean, there's a touch of smoke around the edges, but it's not like, to me, it's not as smoky smelling as I thought it would be when we pulled it out.
You wouldn't mistake this for an Isla
Correct.
just from the nose.
But it's not completely invisible. I liked it, and I hope we got you on the mic there. When you first stuck your nose in this, Scott, you said, hot damn. and my internal dialogue was very similar to that, which is just, oh, this is good. This nose immediately has my attention. Are you getting... are you getting the Catoctin Creek? Where is Catoctin Creek in this? I can see you really...
For me, the Catoctin Creek is the vertebrae. It's the spine of it, right? So there's this fruity, nutty, mid-palate kind of juiciness that, to me, describes Catoctin Creek. So I can taste that fruity, nutty is kind of where I always go with that in there. But I am definitely getting phenols in the taste. It is rich and it is phenolic.
It's just wrapping the smoke around and under my tongue as it goes. The viscosity is perfectly Catoctin. I mean, to me, that's the weight on the tongue. It comes in with flavor and intensity at the same time, which I really like in a whiskey. But it's just kind of drapes itself over, and then it has that smoke coming up.
What do you think?
As you're talking about that viscosity, I had to take another sip. I had to turn it around in my mouth. I had to coat my tongue with it. That viscosity is definitely there. It's then got that drying quality, right? The smoke is a little ashy. I get what you're saying about the nuttiness as well there, Scott, where it's almost like a charred peanut, right? An unshelled peanut, but if you've pulled it out the ashes of a campfire.
Yeah, I definitely get the smoke is more ashy than it is other things. It's really good though. There's an acidity. Sometimes I call it acidity or a citric quality to it that I think is sometimes in our whiskey as well. Lemon peel, a little pith, maybe with just a touch of that bitterness, but it's really bright. I mean, it's not heavy or in any way overbearing.
Do you remember way back in the beginning when you pulled the boisé from the sherry cask, and that was like sucking on a charred stick? Yeah, it was hard to get it over your palate.
Right.
And we talked at the time about a little tiny bit of that goes a long way.
Yeah.
And now here I am tasting this from the cask, getting some of that charred oak, getting some of that rich, deep sherry. But I love your note about the citrus in there as well.
Yeah.
There's a brightness, there's a lightness. Holy moly.
Despite the really, really rich color and viscosity, because you know this is a radio show, so you know if we only talked about dark colors and big viscosity, people are going to think it's really rich and heavy, and it's actually quite bright and really, really something.
Yeah.
I like your note about the little bit of lemon pith because it does feel just that little tiny bit. I mean, we were talking about astringency versus drying quality and the language that astringency is sometimes considered to be negative. But it isn't when it's bracing. It isn't when it brings this kind of little touch of bitterness that kind of wraps around and really balances out some of the sweetness that comes from some of the sherry and things. It's like you need that little bit of astringency to kind of stiffen it up a little bit.
Agreed wholeheartedly. And as you're talking there, I'm getting a little bit of bitter chocolate to the back of the palate in the transition
I can
into
see
the
that.
finish.
Yeah, I can see that. Dark chocolate, 100% unsweetened or whatever.
Right?
Yeah.
Oh, that's a drinker. There's no doubt about it. This, and here's the thing. Here's why I led with the January tasting of this, is that each time we tasted this, and we've pulled thanks to you good people, we've pulled a full bottle sample each time we've kind of pulled a sample because we want to see that transition. We want to go on that journey. And in January, it felt like Catoctin Creek was in there, but the smoke really wasn't. The sweet sherry really wasn't. And we'd hoped that this other season would pull more out of that and bring it more together. And as I sample this today, this is the first time in sampling it that I'm getting Catoctin Creek, and I'm getting Kilchoman, and I'm getting sherry, and I'm getting battle char. It's been a long 18 months. And I'm getting barrel char. So really, really magnificent.
You know, so I mean, we have a quandary or a choice to make. You know, this is the problem with doing this is, so do you declare this to be the best that it can be, or do you wait longer hoping for it to get better, right? And that's the real quandary, is that it could go back to sleep. You know, it could be this is the prime and you take it now, or you say, well, let's just see what it's like in the fall.
Well, and we've, ever since day one, and we bottled a Kilchoman 4-year-old in our first outturn of 3 casks. And the number of people who sampled that and said, wow, this is great. But could you imagine it as a 6-year-old or an 8-year-old or a 12-year-old? And we said, that could be potentially amazing.
Yeah.
But we loved it on the day we tasted it
have
as
to
a 4-year-old.
Take it. It's ephemeral. You have to take it when you get it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And one of the conversations we had, and we've had this with you, Becky, but we've also had it with Kirsty McCallum when she was still with Glen Murray, the idea that maturation is not linear. And just because it tastes like this today doesn't mean it'll taste like this, but more in another month.
Absolutely.
Or another
It's more
year.
of a sine wave. You know, we've talked with Dan Farber, who runs Osacalis, and he has, 2-3 centuries of experience with brandy making. And he will talk about, brandy that goes to sleep in the barrel and it tastes like nothing, 12 years, 13 years. And then on the 14th year, miraculously, for no known reason to science at all, the flavor just blossoms and all of a sudden you've got a fruit bomb,
It wakes right back up again out of
right.
nowhere.
And it just says sometimes you have to grab these things when they're ready.
Well, I agree, and I don't think, that's the biggest thing that we deal with when people always ask about our whiskey and, but wouldn't it be better if it were older? Well, not necessarily. Everything doesn't always get better with age, and that's always the question.
I can verify that, but not better with age.
As we're both crouching and finding things to lean on, it's not all better.
It's always a challenge to figure out when to pull something. I would be really excited about drinking this any day.
Yeah, I think so. I think it might be time.
I think you might be right. The thing I want to do is check up on birthday. And I think it had a birthday in February, to be honest with you. And then the only other thing is the anniversary of when it went into the Kilchoman Cask.
Right.
But as we stand here, and we don't always give away the dates, but as we stand here on July 9, that's doing the things that Joshua and I were hoping it would do when we conceived of this project. And I, of course, have to say sincere thanks to the two of you who were on board with this and had something for this and have played along with us every step of the way. So sincere thanks. We love you both dearly.
Oh,
but this is why we do what we do.
Well, my pleasure. Somebody stole my glass.
You know, as people show up to come and do other work, we have to share.
I looked down and it wasn't there.
Well, this is brilliant. Thanks ever so much. We'll make a final decision on this and see what we can do. But I love it, and it's done exactly what we wanted.
Great. It's our pleasure.
What fun.
Brilliant. Cheers, both of you.
While we were listening to me with Scott and Becky there tasting through that, and what a treat, gosh, more in a second, I went back into the archives here and I checked the samples, and we did indeed last taste a sample together in September of 2020 in Kentucky that had been pulled in August of 2020. So there you go. From August really through to July. If you'd asked me, I would not have thought we'd gone 11 months between samples. But that's the world we inhabit.
That is it. My gosh, time flies. And I'll tell you, I remember that taste. It'll be interesting nosing and tasting this against that memory.
Well, and I think there was that part of the conversation just now with Scott and Becky where I'm saying you and I were going through samples thinking this isn't coming together, right? Is there a bit of smoke in here? Yes. Is there a bit of sherry in here? Yes. Is there a bit of Catoctin Creek in here? Yeah. Is there a bit of rye in here? Yes. But in that last sample that we'd had, it wasn't cohesive. And I think that's the point at which we'd said, if this is August, we're going to close out the fall, we're only going into winter and spring, we might need to sit on this. And I'm not even talking about the samples. I'm not even talking about the next time we thought we'd need to sample it. Just you and I thought this is going to take another warm season to really get that wood working. And I think your use of at least, right? In case any listener just missed that. Yeah, that sense of at least. And so pouring this July with Scott and Becky, I wasn't sure what we were going to get in the glass.
Yeah, I won't lie. I didn't have high hopes, but that's only because I think you and I think a lot of people are still trying to put our heads around what the course of maturation looks like, because it isn't linear. And we had tasted, if that other sample was pulled in August, and you figure you figure summer in Virginia is going to really make that cask work and really do some magic on the spirit, you would think, okay, that's where it's going to taste the best. So when you pulled this sample in July, I said, well, it may just be a slightly bigger version of what it tasted like in 2020. But as I'm nosing this, it's remarkable, Jason. This nose has all of those components that you just listed out, that entire grocery list. They're now intertwined. They're now cohesive.
Yes. And I think it's interesting because on one hand, we're clearly finding out that maturation is not linear. However, we combined these two 30-gallon casks in September of 2019.
Yep.
We then saw quite a quiet period in the beginning there. You and I tasted that day one combination sample.
Yeah.
And it almost had more going on than the January 2020 sample.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And then we got to August, so we had our first, bit of summer going on in that cask. But last summer in Virginia was actually very wet. You then cut through to July of 2021, and this summer has been very dry. And I wonder if even if maturation isn't linear, there are key climactic moments
Yeah.
that really register changes in your cask.
Yeah.
And so even thinking about September to August to July, we've really hit some moments that have allowed this to come together. And I can't quite remember if Scott and I or Becky, Scott and I had discussed this on wax, but tasting this in July, Scott had said, if you wanted to wait to September to bottle this, you're not going to see a radical transformation in those months. And so my concern there was, gosh, if we go through the month of July, is it going to go off a cliff?
Yeah.
And him saying, no, there are some key movements. What's going to be the bigger difference for you is if you want to bottle this in January, this will be a different cask than it is July, August, obviously into September.
Yeah. Well, as you were going through all of that, I had 3 sips. And
It's easily done.
right, and the first one came through with a burst of ginger and chicory and barbecue and things like that. And then the second one, you'd been using for a while now with a few different whiskeys, Backwoods Distilling being one, and there was another whiskey, I think maybe a Wild
I
Turkey.
know what you're going to say.
Where you're saying chocolate cherry.
That's it.
I'm not getting chocolate cherry here. What I'm getting is chocolate raspberry. So
interesting. Interesting.
It's a bit brighter than that cherry, and that was just like, but it was warm, right? And that warmth connected to the texture of this, and all in the background, you're tasting all these flavors. You just happen to be next to a tiny little campfire that's just giving you some smoky ambiance, right?
Mm-hmm. For the careful listener and for the completionists out there, the other distillery was Virginia Distillery Company, where we have an episode coming up shortly. I tasted an STR cask with them that was chocolate covered cherries through and through.
Oh, that is excellent.
As I tasted it and as I discussed it, even off wax with Scott and Becky, it started to make me think of a thread, right? If we're looking at these 2 no cuts Catoctin Creek casks, which is just an expression I like saying,
Uncircumcised.
and
Do you want to
and for
go down
Becky,
that path? Yeah. Sorry, Becky.
and for Becky, and for Becky, those 2 casks didn't represent the Catoctin Creek style as she wants it, as you and I are fond of saying, writ large, right?
Yep.
But as I taste this, and as I discussed it with Scott and Becky, there is a Catoctin thread present here for me, and it occurs in the transition from mid-palate to finish. There's almost a drying blackberry tea happening.
Yeah.
That I remember from our first Catoctin Creek. I distinctly remember from our second Catoctin Creek. And now here, even with a no cuts project, that little bit of drying blackberry tea still transitions into the finish for me.
Yeah, it's one of the things that I've always loved about Catoctin Creek. Everybody's go-to, at least in their heads, when it comes to rye whiskey, is MGP, right? It's that 95.5 mash bill with that spice and the dill pickles. And Catoctin Creek's 100% rye has always been fruitier, blackberries, blueberries, things like that. And I like you putting that finer point on it of a blackberry tea. I think that's really nice because it brings through some of the. You can't escape the oak being in there, right? So that delicate dryness, that delicate astringency coming through, which is so pleasing. Yep.
Which is certainly a back and forth that's run through multiple episodes of the podcast, which is this idea that in Europe you can say astringent And in America, you cannot.
Yeah.
You have to say drying in America. And I was having that conversation with Scott and Becky that we're grown-ups drinking a rye product. It's okay to experience some astringency on the edges of the tongue, right? It's a pleasing experience, and for me, it heightens the enjoyment. As I'm sitting drinking this sample, it's juicy, it's unctuous, it's rich, my dear balancer, right? It's got so many things going on, but as it dries the outside edges of the tongue, and as it dries the back of the palate, as it transitions to the finish, it has me reaching for it again to take this another juicy sip to bring unctuousness back into my mouth again. And to me, that's the circle of life. This is why I drink alcohol. I love that continuous feedback loop where, gosh, boy, do I want a really tasty beverage today. Oh boy, does that taste lovely. Oh, yes, that drying. Okay, I better take another one of these down the hatch, right? I love that ongoing process.
Go back into it, and I want you to think there's umami in here, and I'm getting it through this nori seaweed wrap kind of note coming through. It's just this delicate umami. Oh my gosh, that's fantastic.
Also do this for me, because this is something I did for you back before I shared a sample with you, where I was busy saying to you, I'm not getting a lot of smoke on it. I'm not getting a lot of peat on it. It's not overly dank. Pour something off your shelf that's really bright, that's really fresh, and then return to the Catoctin Creek. I'm going to pour some King Street Great Artist Blend.
All right. Okay. You know what? I'm going to pour a little Aberlour bourbon cask.
Okay. Cue the Jeopardy music. As I walked over to my shelf after you had mentioned pouring some Aberlour bourbon cask, the Abuna Alba caught my eye. And so I thought, that's what I'll go and pour. So I've got Abuna Alba in my glass, natural cask strength, 59.1%, and it is young. No age statement, but it is young. But just get your nose in your Aberlour. Just really commit your nose to it. Throw some across your palate.
Gosh, I'm so glad Aberlour are doing the Abuna Alba. Their spirit shines in bourbon. All right, down the palate.
I will say Alba is not my favorite Aberlour. I've had much better bourbon casks from them, but at 59.1%, it's easy to drink it.
I think it's good enough to warrant a purchase of batch 2 to see how it evolves.
Okay, so with a bit of that Aberlour in your nose, across your palate, now go back to this Catoctin Creek.
All right, here we go. Oh my gosh. Just nosing it. It's really smoky.
Yep.
Oh, it's there's a bit of ashtray going on there. It's slightly dirty.
Yep. Agreed. Yeah, to me it's more ash than it is campfire.
Yeah. Well, right? Isn't that interesting? For me, I did detect it before, and it was more campfire before, but going from the Aberlour to this, now it is more ash.
And then put that across the palate.
Oh boy, that's like I've had a cocktail. I want to say it was at Milk Bar in Chicago, where they had this bourbon cocktail where they smoked the bourbon. And I'm getting echoes of that. Just delicate smoke. Wow.
For me, it's got a little bit of the aftertaste of smoking a good cigar. Just occupies the very back of the mouth, the very back of the throat. It's not overpowering, it's not overwhelming, but it's another dimension. Wow. And it's at this point that I want to say such, and I know it's we want to say this.
Yes.
But it's such a sincere thank you to Scott and Becky, where they did a little internal project that didn't fit their distillery needs, that they thought, yeah, that might work for Single Cask Nation. The Nation members might get a kick out of that. But they also allowed us to do something that had never been done in the history of Catoctin Creek. And their history is the same as ours. They're a decade into this.
Yeah. Yep.
There has never been a Catoctin Creek in an ex-peat cask.
There you go.
So not only have they trusted us with no cuts, they've also trusted us with a peated cask.
I'm trying to rack my brain. So firstly, Scott, Becky, thank you so much. I mean, the fact that you allowed us to use Catoctin Creek's spirit and some of your warehouse space as a playground for us to collaborate on something that could be very special from many different angles. It gets back to what you were saying before, Jason, where there's a relationship there that is a friendship, right? And we cannot thank them enough. And
if I can add on,
yeah, please.
and this is a spirit of collaboration bottle.
Yeah.
I don't think spirit of collaboration could be any clearer than what we're doing with Scott and Becky at Catoctin Creek.
And Kilchoman, right? When we reached out to them,
Right,
we wanted a quality PX cask. We wanted good Isla influence. And when we asked Anthony Wills, can we talk about this being a Kilchoman cask? Because at that point, he doesn't have to do that. The whiskey could have turned out terrible for all he knows. And if his
could have turned out terrible for all of us.
Right, for all of us. And I'm sure he wouldn't want his name attached to something. But he trusted us to do that. So huge thank you to Scott and Becky, and a huge thank you to Anthony Wills as well.
Yeah, and I don't want to get us too far away from the original point, and I know you've got a follow-up point, but it also makes me think of our time with Glenmurray when we found the Fino cask out in the wild.
Yep.
And then went to Glenmurray and said, hey, look, we found this cask. I know it's not coming from you directly. Would you mind if we bottled it? And they said, we trust your palate. I feel that way with Scott and Becky and with Anthony. Look, this hasn't been done before. This could be hot garbage.
Yeah.
But I think the knowledge was in place there that we would have the good sense to walk away from it and not force it into a Single Cask Nation bottle. We wouldn't take down our name. We wouldn't take down Catoctin Creek. We wouldn't take down Kilchoman. If this had gone horribly wrong, it would have just disappeared from sight. On the flip side of that, holy moly, has it gone incredibly correct.
Yeah.
So what was your other point?
Yeah, so my other point, and you started touching on it yet again, is not only is this the first time for Catoctin Creek, I can't think of another time where a rye whiskey, or an American whiskey for that matter, has been extra matured in a peated sherried cask. I know Wild Turkey has extra matured some of their stuff in peated. They didn't like how it turned out, and I think they dumped the project, similar to what we would have done if we didn't like how ours turned out. So I think that this is big for all of us, for Catoctin Creek, Kilchoman, and Single Cask Nation. We're doing something that I don't think has ever been done before, period. And that's exciting. That's really exciting.
Really exciting.
Yep.
Yeah, and to have partners willing to play in the same sandbox is very cool.
Yep. Yep.
So here's cheers to everybody involved, because this is really, really cool and really exciting. Cheers all.
Yeah, cheers all. So, you and I have a cheeky wee bit of news. We have
Just
some
very cheeky.
Yeah, really cheeky, really small. We have some emails that came in, but I think we're going to hold them until the next episode. Some really interesting ones that came in. And in fact, one from our friend Ian Bruce. He's emailed us recently, so it's nice to see his name popping up again.
And I think I saw Dr. Matt Bishop come in.
Dr. Matt Bishop and James Foster wrote in again, and there's one other person.
I got a little prod from Tim Mushaw, who quoted a comment I made on a previous episode that didn't come to fruition, which we're still working on behind the scenes. I know people are... Let's cut to the news and then we'll bring this back up again.
Extra, extra! Read all about it! Life story of Playboy Penny! Extra, extra! Extra, extra! Read all about it! Me and that Playboy in trouble.
So first bit of news, Jason, that I'd like to bring up, unless you want to, you teased the listeners before the Paperboy spoke. Do you want to share your bit of Tim Mushaw news?
I will take the birch to myself in just a moment. I will let you put out your news first.
So for those of you living in New York and New Jersey, some good news. Our distributor in those two states confirmed to us that Single Cask Nation retail release number 7 will be for sale legally come September 1 in those two fair states. Yes?
No, just for the benefit of the listener here, I think something that not everybody listening to this podcast would know is that at least for the state of New York, and I even know there's some slight differences with New Jersey and Connecticut, but each Single Cask Nation retail cask label has to be approved by the New York government.
Yeah. There's a registration process, and they have to get a copy of the label. I don't know if it's necessarily an approval, but more a logging of those labels, right? So New York is a really good example. We're going to get a bit tangential here, but I think this is a good tangent to get on. New York is a good example where legally you can't have an exclusive cask or an exclusive release or exclusive bottling for any shop or bar or restaurant within New York. Now, that bar or restaurant or shop can purchase a single cask through a distributor, receive that bottle, and then put their little sticker on there. Right? The law doesn't stop them from doing that. The law stops distributors from legally selling to an individual company. Though individual companies can legally purchase the whole of a cask, right? So you see where this happens. And so with New York, the label registration that includes a picture of what the label looks like is, if they see a cask that says Single Cask Nation 28-year-old Deluane sherry cask, and then it has tasting notes on the label, and then someone from the NYSLA, New York State Liquor Authority, goes into Joe's Wine and Liquor and sees that what actually has been received is a label that shows an exclusivity message on the label that doesn't match what you registered, people are going to get into trouble, right? So that's part of the registration process.
Yeah, it's interesting to me. Obviously, I'm Scottish. I lived in the UK, raised in the UK, but also speaking to friends in Australia, Sweden. What does that look like? Finland. What does that look like? It's just always interesting to me that on one hand we talk about the United States and we talk about retail release number 7 for the United States, but as it sits in California, it looks one way. As it goes to Alaska, it looks another way. As it goes out to New York, the jurisprudence, if you will, looks another way. And it's always interesting to me that, gosh, there are so many breakdowns in the United States for how individual states go about taking care of business.
Yes.
So I just thought I would throw that in there, just because we're saying all this about it will be legal and it will finally be on shelves. Well, there's a reason why it takes time, and it's bureaucracy. Here we are.
Yep. And, Alaska is a good point to bring up because our whiskeys are in Alaska for anybody from Alaska listening in. So that's good news. So come September 1, New York, New Jersey people, whether you're just a consumer or you're interested in Single Cask Nation release number 7, you can start reaching out to your retailers, see if they'll bring it in. If you're a retailer or bar owner or something like that, our distributor is Skurnik Wines, so check them out. If you have an account with them, great. If you don't, it's pretty free to get an account with them, so go ahead and do that if you're interested in Single Cask Nation products. That was my bit of news, Jason. So let me hand you an olive branch, not an olive branch, but just a branch to beat your fucking back with. There you go.
I prefer the birch. Please, if you could just hand over the birch, that would be sufficient.
Don't call me a birch.
Life's a birch. On the
die.
last episode of One Nation Under Whiskey, we said that the retail release number 7 information would be on the website.
Yes, we did, Jason.
And Tim, our beloved Tim, reached out to me. It was a lovely email. He said a host of other things. But he closed with the acknowledgement that retail release number 7 isn't on the website. And he is correct. And we're just between a little bit of a rock and a hard place right now as far as news goes. We are working on a much larger company-wide website.
Yep.
And we're working out where things will reside and how things can be positioned clearly. And so unfortunately, retail release number 7 has just fallen between a rock and a hard place. At some point, it will get written up. I would even like there to be a downloadable PDF, but that's way beyond my technical capabilities. But yes, we understand the need to communicate with people who would like to buy it, what's in it. Telling people continually on the podcast is not quite enough. So
that's true. However, if there are any listeners out here interested in the full details of Single Cask Nation retail release number 7, all they need to do is go to impexbev.com and go to products, and then to the navigation where you see products, and then scroll down to Single Cask Nation. They've updated their website to reflect what release number 7 looks like. Tasting notes, cast details, ABVs, I think, recommended retail pricing, the whole thing. So that is where Tim should go. That's where anyone else listening should go while we transition, hopefully soon, to our larger website.
Indeed. And then on other happy news, ROW3.
What is ROW3?
Rest of the world, UK. Yeah, rest of the world, UK. Number 3. That has been bottled. It is awaiting labeling. And Jess, our global sales manager, is beginning to embark upon conversations with UK retailers and then global importers and distributors.
Right, you can't just say European. We're in Israel. We're in Japan. South America.
Cool.
South America. South Africa.
Is that a bit? What's that about?
No, I couldn't say South Africa. So there you go. I'm going to leave that in for our listeners.
Not that it's easy to get product into South Africa with their on again, off again, as we discussed in the early running.
But for our South African listeners, there may be some of our MGP exclusive with Whiskey Brother available. So once liquor sales open up a bit more, I think they did open a bit. You can always check with Whiskey Brother if you want to. I said MGP, didn't I? It's not MGP. It was a Tennessee
did
bourbon.
say MGP.
Yeah, it was a Tennessee bourbon. That's right. So there you go.
And then just in terms of our bottling hall in Scotland, just working their tail off for us, we have more product getting ready to go for US retail. We've got more product ready to go for US online sales to the nation. And we've got more product getting ready to go for UK rest of the world. So
Yeah.
there's a ton of things. And as you and I have I think, quite honestly admitted to in other episodes of this podcast, we're doing our best to get glass produced. We're doing our best to get capsules produced. We're doing our best to get labels produced. We're doing our best to get freight moved around the world. It has been an incredibly difficult 2021. And
Yep.
all of our partners have done their best. We've done our best. Jess and Elijah have done their best. We're all doing our best. And hopefully we'll have a ton of whiskey to share very soon, including retail release number 7 for our friends out in the East, but it's certainly been in California for a bit, certainly in Washington, it's certainly in Oregon.
Yep,
How's Illinois looking?
Yeah, it's in Illinois. It started hitting shelves.
Terrific.
Actually, Gene at Warehouse Liquors sent a picture over, and I shared that with our Facebook group.
Oh, wonderful.
And yeah, it's been great. So you're going to see it starting to hit more shelves over there, which is fantastic. And it continues to spread far and wide. Minnesota, it'll be going into, and Alaska, like I mentioned, Colorado. So it's exciting. It's really exciting to see our stuff on store shelves.
Excellent. Well, that's the end of my piece of the news. You?
You know what? Let's leave it there. Let's leave it there, Jason. We're gonna pull a George Costanza. We know when to leave the room. We're gonna drop the mic and we're gonna leave.
It's not a Kenny Rogers, know when to hold them, know when to fold them.
Know when to walk away. Know when to run.
when to
you
run.
better count your money. When you're sitting at the table, there'll be time enough to count them when the dealing's done. There you go, Jason. I hope I'm on key for that. God damn it. I tell you, I know I will catch some serious shit if I'm not on key when it comes to Tim Gullick's RØDE. However, if I am on key, then I have earned many a brownie point, Jason. Many a brownie point.
Well, I am ready to call it a day and get the heck out of Dodge.
Let's make like a tree and get out of here, as Biff once said on Back to the Future.
Indeed. Okay, Joshua, dear listeners, it's been real.
It has been real. Cheers. Cheers, one and all.
Until next time. Double checked my preferences multiple times and one last time for good measure. So that looks good. Yeah,
Did you check
everything's-
yourself before you wrecked yourself?
You know, this is just a personal preference, but I always wreck myself before I check myself.
Wreck yourself
Yeah.
before you check yourself. I like
It's
that.
just a personal preference.
Yeah, it's life's little surprises, right? That's what
Always
you're
a
looking
wrinkle.
for. Yeah.
Okay, take us in.
Okay. Let me just get a little sip of my Gyokuro.
Glug, glug, glug. Down the hatch.
Oh, no, yep. That's definitely brewed to the max. Hello. Hello, everybody. Oh, shit.
Brewed to the max is a good expression. That is good expression. Oof, that's brewed to the max.
Yeah, really caught me in the back of my throat there.
That takes me back to college.